Agreed that item 24 and paragraph 3 of report number 2 will be debated next. I now call upon Councillor Govindia to move and Councillor Mrs Tracy to second the motion set out in item 24 on economic and social regeneration.
Mr Mayor, I formally move.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to second the motion.
Thank you.
And in doing so, shall I speak immediately?
Go straight ahead.
Absolutely. When I came here this evening and saw the demonstration that we heard about earlier, my first comment to one of the couriers that I saw in the car park was, gosh, it's like the good old days. And then I had another look at the demonstration, and actually it probably wasn't quite as big or as how can I put this? It wasn't quite the same as in the good old days. And then I came into the chamber and we had the first debate, and we really were back to my time at the very beginning on the council, with the Labour Party talking about the Conservatives not having any, how this is not what the electorate want, and how they want massive changes. And you know, I came in a by-election a year before the next group of council elections, when I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure we went from 1 to about 10, and then we've increased our majority since then. So I would just like to start this debate, which is actually on aspirations, and aspirations for the borough and for the borough residents, in letting the opposition know that this is our big vision. This is what is important to us. And for those people that, those members that were at the corporate parenting meeting that we had last week, when one youngster that was asked what he was going to do when he left school, and he very confidently said, I'm going to Oxford, will understand why aspiration is important to us. And what is even more important is that our youngsters now want the same aspiration. They want to be as successful as the most successful, and if there's anything we can do in this chamber, it's to give them the wherewithal for doing that. I am conscious that we do leave some families behind, and it's not to anyone's benefit that we have some families whose sole ambition and aspiration in life is to live on a council estate on benefits, where they don't even bother to get up to take their children to school, they don't register with a doctor, consequently their children don't get immunised, they allow their children to indulge in antisocial behaviour and perhaps indulge in it themselves, which is why we have been able to put so much money aside for the troubled family, well, not the troubled families, but the Family Recovery Project. It's only working with a small group of families, but the difference is phenomenal. The difference for those families, and if anybody thought it was good to leave those families on benefits without help and support, they ought to go and visit some of them, because those families also have aspirations. They have been trapped in a world created by our opposition, where it was all right not to achieve, where it was all right not to have ambitions to buy your council flat or whatever else it was. And it just wasn't, within the old days of the ILEA, I can't imagine, but there weren't many youngsters who even aspired to go to Oxford, let alone got there. So aspiration is our new vision, and there are various ways that we will be fulfilling this. The different ways that one delivers a form of aspiration, and I'm very conscious of the debate earlier, or the questions earlier, about the 1 o'clock centres. The only way that we can do that is by making sure that those youngsters that are the most disadvantaged within society actually have the greatest chance and opportunities. And I make no excuse for actually making a small fee at 4 of our most affluent 1 o'clock centres, if it means we're going to be able to make sure the others survive. I also make no excuse for the fact that we have moved the way that we deal with the most disadvantaged in this borough. I'm enormously proud that every one of our 8 special educational needs schools are outstanding and have had phenomenal investment in the facilities. Councillor Boswell and I and a couple of others visited our junior referral unit earlier this week, and we were all enormously impressed, not just by the dedication of the staff, but also by the fantastic facilities. And that has been a shift since I first became a councillor, but the big shift over the next term of this Conservative administration, and there will be another term of a Conservative administration, will to make sure that the aspirations of all our residents reaches the top that is possible, rather than accepting, as used to be the mentor, I think it was we all used to say that we wanted to give them the opportunities to deliver as much as they could. That no longer is acceptable. Now it's a race for the top.
Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This council created modern Latchmere, the ward I represent, and we got it wrong. We built streets in the sky where neighbours fear to talk to each other. We designed estates with few shops and no jobs, no employers, and in some cases they literally had walls put around them. We had a tenancy policy which, alongside a misguided right to buy policy, has intensified poverty on those estates. And as I told this chamber in my maiden speech, I joined this council to change Latchmere, not to keep it the same. Since I said that in 2010, 6 young men have been shot and 1 stabbed to death on the Winstanley and York Road estates in Latchmere. The Kingham report into the Clapham Junction riots pointed out that the Winstanley estate is in the 1% of worst places to grow up as a child in this entire country. So it's very encouraging that the council's approach has, alongside a bold look at the design of these estates, a real effort to lift people's spirits and fire their ambitions to give back some of the honour and goodness that has drained from their lives. And I also strongly welcome the changes to the housing allocations policy, which will allow long-standing residents to stay in our communities by giving priority for the amount of time they've been waiting. Councillor Tracy spoke very well about aspiration and the care we give our very vulnerable young children, although I think she was perhaps a little too partisan, and you know, our movement has improved people's access to education, to healthcare, to the legal system from a very low level where the ruling classes and the market were very happy to leave it. I know Councillor Gibbons feels very strongly about the family intervention aspect of this, and we'll say a few more words about that. I'd like to talk briefly about the wall that divides communities in Wandsworth and what we can do to come together. The average property in Wandsworth now costs £500,000, and the household income of people buying them topped £100,000 for the first time last year. It is good news that more than half of all the people in Wandsworth now have a degree or higher qualification. We truly are the brighter borough. But all of this increases the gap between the families whose lives have stood still and all of the very brightest people from around the country who come here and choose to make it their home. Income data shows we continue to be divided. Over the past 4 years, we've seen an increase in the number of people earning over £70,000 in the borough, and an increase in the number of people earning under £15,000, but a reduction in every other category. So there's a sort of hollowing out there. More than any physical separation barrier, the worst estates create what the writer Lindsay Hanley calls the wall in the head. She describes this as an almost insurmountable mental barrier to social mobility. Low expectations and not knowing what is out there, or believing that what is out there is entirely irrelevant to your life, or so complicated that it would go right over your head if you made an attempt to understand it. The need to learn a completely new language and way of behaving in order to transcend where you're from. And after the Clapham Junction riots, I arranged to meet a group of teenagers who'd been involved and observers in the disorder, and they blamed family, the government, boredom and so on, but shot through the entire thing was a fatalism that the whole system is stacked against them, so why even try? And there's a really solid wall between those young people and us. So while we redesign our estates to remove walls and make them more open to the world and to new businesses, it is right that we also work on the mental barriers that hold people back. And this is difficult, and it won't happen first time, and when people miss an opportunity, we shouldn't exclude them, we should reach out further. So I hope both parties can agree the Council will continue down this path, where we use our power to rebuild and inspire in our most deprived areas and break down the walls between all residents. Thank you.
Councillor Caddy.
Nearly 2 years ago, I watched in disbelief as rioters and looters set fire to areas of my borough that I knew well and visited regularly, and areas that my friends live in. I was shocked at the contrast between my experiences having coffee with friends or shopping and walking in the sunshine with my kids and the scenes on the television. And along with many other people, I thought a lot about what had caused the riots and what lessons we could learn from them to stop something like that happening again. Like Councillor Hogg, listening to interviews with some of the local young people, it struck me that the key theme was that some of these kids really had no plans or ambitions for the future. And I thought about why and what could be done to encourage the aspirations of some of the young people in our borough. One conclusion that I drew was that for a whole host of reasons, the message, the mood music for some teenagers in Wandsworth was that their future was less than rosy, that all they could expect was to find it really hard to get a job, hard to own a house, hard to live in a deprived neighbourhood, and defeat and pessimism prevailed. A few months later I was elected in Southfields, and I think at literally my first group meeting I learnt some of the detail of the plans that the council had for an aspirations programme in the borough. Now, one of the criticisms I hear a lot of local government, and we've heard some of it from the opposition tonight, is that we don't look at problems strategically or holistically, and that different arms work independently, that we miss out on the big picture. To me, this aspirations programme was absolutely the opposite of this. It brings together a wide variety of different detailed good things that the council are doing in Battersea and Roehampton. Each of the schemes on their own is obviously a positive step for the individuals affected. The Family Recovery and Troubled Families programme, establishment of the 18 Up panel, a mentoring scheme for young men, the Roehampton Health Challenge. But these schemes will only ever touch directly a small proportion of people in the borough. I actually think that one of the biggest benefits we'll get from the investment we're putting into these areas will come from the fact that our message is changing, or if not changing, at least getting through in a much stronger and coordinated way. And I think this goes to the heart of what Councillor Hogg was saying in terms of breaking down those mental walls. The programme sends a clear message about what the council believes, that it's committed to improving social mobility and life chances for everyone. The message isn't just being sent through a physical regeneration of surroundings, but also the services that people encounter, the neighbourhood engagement that goes on, the attitude of schools and healthcare professionals. It's the antithesis of the throw money at a problem approach that was so favoured by the last government, and it really seems to try to go to the heart of the problems, investing resource, but crucially in the right places and to the right people. The message is that everyone is important to our future, and the key to getting any message across is consistency and repetition, and this programme gives exactly that. Hearts do matter as much as heads, and if we can succeed in getting all the different strands of local government to reiterate the same unwavering message about aspiration, then the mood music will change and we will all benefit. The actions detailed in these recent progress reports will continue to reinforce the message that this council is committed to improving the attainment, employment and engagement of people in our most deprived areas. And I hope that the defeat and pessimism in some quarters will be replaced by optimism and success.
Councillor Gibbons.
Thank you. Particularly the element of the family recovery project and the Troubled Families Programme is obviously something that I think we welcome on both sides of the chamber. In fact, I know we do. I think it has its roots in some of the work done in the last Labour government under Labour's family intervention projects, and I'm glad to see that despite other areas being cut back, this seems to be something that has a thread of continuity. The kind of families who are being supported are the kind of families the Daily Mail loves us to hate. They're troubled families. They're families in debt. Families who struggle with parenting, struggle with school attendance. The home life is often violent, chaotic. There is abuse. The families may not have regular work, perhaps for generations. They're involved in crime. They have housing problems. They have substance abuse problems and sometimes mental health problems. These are troubled families, not always antisocial families, but certainly not families that we would like to grow up in ourselves. And it's incredibly important for the good of the children in those families, even though we might perhaps have a gut instinct about the adults in those families, that we work with the family to make sure that those cycles and patterns are not repeated. The paper suggests there's about 120,000 such families in Britain, and it's a kind of figure that's achieved circulation. But I would guess there's a hinterland of families behind this who are struggling and who probably need help as well. And I think we need to start concentrating on the families that most need the help, but then begin to roll this out, making sure that families do not slide into this position. One problem we may perhaps encounter is the fact that other government initiatives, such as the benefit cap, may hinder the progress that we plan to make. Out of 35 family recovery project cases, 8 are affected by the benefits cap, and out of original 262 families engaged in these projects, 25 were caught within this benefits trap. I think it might be worth considering, or the government worth considering, that families who sign up to this, and they do have to sign up to this, they do have to agree to this, should have transitional support in order to make sure that the money we are spending on this is available for families with continuity. In other words, we don't want them to have to move out of the area and restart somewhere else. We want to be able to maintain contact with these families. I think this is a genuinely progressive policy because its aim is to make sure that the next generation does not repeat the mistakes of the previous generation, that it wants the children to achieve more than their parents. It also, interestingly, shows a great belief in agency, that we, through intervention, through structure, as the state, as the borough, can actually make a change and a difference to people's lives, not meddling in them, interfering them, but supporting them, helping them, and changing them for the better to make sure that the future for these families is better than the past.
Councillor Mrs Sutters.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We've heard a lot tonight from both sides, and I think there's a lot of commonality between us on what we actually think on this agenda. But I wanted to start with a quote from Gordon Brown, which is, "How much talent that could flourish is lost through a poverty of aspiration, wasted not because young talents fail to reach the stars, but because they grow up with no stars to reach," which I think plays to the agenda of the barriers in the head. But I also recognise that that only tells half the story, because it's not enough merely to talk about aspiration if you do not back it up with concrete initiatives that allow people to succeed. And I believe that we are good at this in Wandsworth, and so we map out our pathways to attainment, whether it's in education, home ownership or employment, because we are always seeking the same thing, to promote the quality of life in our communities and individual well-being in the widest sense of the word. I could pick any number of areas in which children's services works to exemplify how we encourage the placing of the foundations of attainment. We've heard a lot tonight about the Sharp End, the Family Recovery Project. What's interesting about that is it's a consensual service, so these troubled families are actually expressing an aspiration for change. They agree to put in place very strong professional support networks that drill down on the root causes of extreme antisocial behaviour and criminal behaviour sometimes, which must be pretty hard. Often there are young people in those families who've never known any boundaries, and go back to the quote I gave earlier, have no stars to reach. As a result, they are particularly ill-equipped to move forwards with their lives. So by working with the families on conflict resolution, appropriate discipline and behaviours, and just as importantly, establishing routines in their daily lives that encourage regular meal patterns, sleep patterns and attendance at school, we're really helping them to move forward. And when we step down those interventions, they allow family members to take control, sometimes for the first time, of their own lives. Now, I've simplified it because you can't do the whole of the Family Recovery Project in 5 minutes, let alone anything else. But I think I want to make the message that it is succeeding, and in many ways it is replacing malfunction with the seeds of aspiration. But I don't agree that we should concentrate just on our troubled families. We need to look equally across our other parts of our society. And our children's centres are working tirelessly to help our less advantaged and marginalised communities from the very earliest opportunity to really focus on good outcomes for our children. The health visitors are the first point of contact with new mums, and they're adept at signposting the most needy. And once in the centres, a targeted offer embracing multidisciplinary teams, well versed in all aspects of parenting and childhood development, empower, inspire and upskill our parents to be their children's first educators. West Hill, in March of this year, received an outstanding Ofsted in a report so rich with endorsements that I find it hard to find one appropriate quote for you all. It talks of inspirational leadership, a service that puts the needs of local families at its heart, and of outstanding outcomes. I would like to say that I think that actually applies to many of our children's centres, and I am very proud to have these facilities in the borough. And of course I couldn't really tackle this subject without mentioning the sterling effort of our schools, who are widening participation in ways too numerous to mention, and inspiring their pupils towards good educational outcomes. They recognise that encouraging pupils to translate aspirations into self-attaining goals, they are playing an important part in promoting successful futures. We have now more than 90% of our schools judged as good or outstanding, compared to only 90% of our schools, compared to only 74% nationally, and improving GCSE and A-level results year on year. We are really delivering for our young people. So whilst popular culture remains obsessed with the extrinsic aspirations of wealth, fame and image, we locally remain completely rooted in our agenda of the intrinsic aspirations of good health, meaningful relationships, personal growth and community contribution. If I want to look further at that, I've only got to go back to where I was last night at the Wandsworth Young Person of the Year Awards, when I sat next to a really inspirational young man from Tooting. He wants to go to America to study maths. He's a very, very talented athlete, and he wants to be the next Usain Bolt. I don't think aspiration comes much higher than that. Thank you.
Grimston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, as I was listening to Councillor Osborne producing that slightly loud and annoying whirring sound that we get from him, going round and round in circles and grinding to a halt as soon as he hit the slightly rocky ground, I couldn't help reflecting that actually lawnmower was a far more accurate description of his coup de grace than any kind of graceful thrust ending a well-fought contest. But, Mr. Mayor, I believe that there are a number of independent measures in the three strands of this excellent wide-ranging motion this evening which are encouraging. But I have to say, for me, what I think is the most exciting thing about it is that it really does indicate, I think, think, a fundamental change in our philosophy of what government is all about. I think for too many years now, in my view, we've seen government taking over more and more of the responsibility for people's lives, doing more and more things that people could, and indeed for most of human existence, have done for themselves. Indeed, there are armies, or at least battalions of officials now in this country who spend an awful lot of their time actually going around preventing people from doing things that would contribute to an exciting and involved life. And underlying, I think, that way that we go about things is this deeply pernicious idea that the way to get on is to get off. That the way to be successful these days is to make absolutely no contribution to the success of our society as a whole. We've heard this from the Labour Party both in this chamber and nationally. The one that always sticks in my mind was the outrage that Councillor Daly expressed when we first put the grit bins out, saying that it was utterly outrageous that people should be expected to sweep snow from their front drives, or front pavements. That was something they should expect the council to do. Nationally, we've seen the extraordinary position that the Labour Party supported a freeze on public sector pay, but vigorously opposed a freeze on benefits for those who did not work. The party that was once the party supporting the workers is now the party supporting those who refuse to work. And in my view, the individual measures referred to in this motion represent a few small steps into the opposite direction, of beginning to see government not as the imposing government, but as the enabling government. That our job is not to do these things for people, but it's to play an active role in clearing away obstacles that prevent people from doing it for themselves, forgetting not only the responsibility for their lives, but also that sense of personal achievement, which I think is what aspiration is all about. And of course, Mr. Mayor, the flip side of aspiration is that those who do not aspire to engage in society, to create wealth, who aspire simply to absorb the wealth of society, will find themselves getting a harder and harder time. I don't believe that's done by anybody from a position of malice or from a position of judging. I've always felt that those who have fared worst and suffered most from the overweening welfare state that we've somehow allowed to develop are those who have become entirely dependent on it and have been stripped from any of that sense of engagement or achievement that those who take responsibility for their own lives and the lives of those around them can enjoy. As I think many of those in this chamber know, I've been getting to know Cuba pretty well over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. It's an extraordinary place. It's been socialist for many years, so of course the economy is absolutely shot to pieces. And yet, because of this, because they cannot afford to do anything apart from education and health, which they do very well, it means that people in Cuba do take responsibility for their neighbours, do take responsibility for their families, do live in extended families, extended communities, where a great deal of time is spent checking that the neighbours are all right, looking after the people next door who may be old or who may face sorts of difficulties. Their economy, and it's a tiny economy, is running a deficit which is less than 1,000th per head of the deficit that the Labour Party bequeathed to the country when it left office in 2010. And yet life expectancy is just 2 years behind ours, and if I could persuade my partner to give up smoking and drinking, I suspect he would reach the Western average very, very quickly. Now, what we have in this country, of course, is a Labour Party that only gets half the story. They've got the bit about destroying the economy right. They've managed to deal with that particular skill. What they haven't got is the follow-up that we cannot continue to take the position that we can continue to spend a third of what we spend of taking the money from our children and doing that. It's a country which recognises... I will, if there's time, certainly.
I don't know if Councillor Grimston agrees with me, shares my concerns then. He talks about responsibility, talks about tackling these problems. But on a day when the latest labour market statistics show that more people are out of work, fewer people are in work, that people are staying out of work longer, we have a Prime Minister that he supports, whose focus, instead of on tackling our economy and his government's absolute failure to bring growth back to the economy, his focus is purely on a battle with his own backbenchers about an issue that doesn't matter to the majority of people in this country who are trying to get on, the traditional Tory pastime of arguing about Europe.
Councillor, I have to say to you, I don't regard that we should be measuring economic growth by the amount of money that we borrow from our children and then spend it on things. Of course, things will happen if we run up a deficit of the size that your party did. But to imagine that is growth, what we are seeing in the economy is a significant reduction in the public sector, the part of the economy that creates no wealth, and an increase in the private sector, the part of the economy that creates wealth. And that is where we need to go. Those were not real jobs if they were jobs that were simply spent on pretending people around doing things that had no real positive purpose for society. And until the Labour Party understands the difference between jobs that create wealth and jobs that destroy wealth, they will never be in a position to be fit to run either this council or this country. I'm delighted at some of the moves, particularly in housing, in terms of the emphasis on those in work, in terms of the armed forces, in terms, I would hope, in due course, of a 5-year residence or connection with the borough before people get social housing. I think some of the physical changes that are talked about here are extremely exciting as well. But fundamentally, I do hope, and I have a number of difficulties over Councillor Gibbons' point. Yes, I recognise, Mr Mayor, I was interrupted. We do need to be careful that we don't perpetuate making it easier and easier for people to live beyond the means that we can afford as a society. But generally speaking, if we really are moving towards people being in charge and government helping them on their way, rather than government being in charge and people having to fit in, then I hope this council will lead the way.
Councillor Belton.
Which I know will really please the majority of my constituents, because it must be the home of the densest population of Chelsea supporters there are. That is that Chelsea won 2-1, that is being told. But one thing that's interesting about Chelsea, indeed football is a very interesting paradigm, all sorts of things, is that whereas when I first became a councillor, most of the people in Latchmere could afford to go, nowadays, of course, they can't afford to go. They're just Chelsea supporters by tradition. They can't actually go, which I think is the root of a problem, which I'll get back to in a second. I actually am guilty of taking this far too casually. I thought, well, we all agree about this, there's not much to say. And then I must say, Councillor Caddy, Councillor Sutter's very good speeches. And frankly, don't usually say this, I was inspired by what Councillor Osborne said. Excuse me. There's something wrong with this one, doesn't work. It really got to the point. And the thing is, these are amelioratory measures. We all support them, but they are amelioration. They're necessary because we don't have enough affordable housing. They're necessary because inequality in this country has grown enormously since 1979. Not just Thatcher, under Blair Brown as well. I'll be frank about that. Where the levels of inequality that have not been equalled for a century, and people drop out at the bottom end. That is why we're having to take these military steps. And Councillor Sutters and Councillor Caddy are quite right in applauding these individual steps, as indeed we all do. Just a quick word on one or two of them. Councillor Gibbons said family recovery project, but a good thing, tackling the worst problems, but isn't there a problem with the next group of people sliding down into this poverty because of the gross inequalities here? And then we get the mendacious speeches, I'm sorry to say, from both Councillor Tracy and Councillor Grimston. Both of which Grimston made a particular point of saying this party was not in favour of aspirations. This party is the party of aspirations for working people, not yours, don't kid yourself. The majority of people on benefits, and you're too bright not to know this, the majority are the working poor being paid ludicrously low wages, and the retired. That's the majority of people on benefits. To listen to you two councillors, you'd say, in fact you quoted, you said people who can't be bothered to get up in the morning. We're talking about an infinitesimal number of those. The majority are the working poor and the retired. That's because retirement pensions are not good enough, and your party's been attacking the pension system for years and years and years, occupational protect pensions in particular, by the way. And your party has been attacking that, and on the other side, on terms of wages for the lowest level, you've always opposed minimum wage. You opposed minimum wage and said it would increase unemployment. When it was introduced, the opposite happened because Labour had an economy that was flourishing. This party is the party that makes the economy work, not yours. Don't get it wrong. You've always been wrong on this. No, I'm not accepting an intervention. I'm not accepting an intervention. I'm not accepting an intervention. I'm not it's mendacious at every level. I don't want to go into too much of an argument about Cuba, but the most powerful economic force in the world has been boycotting their goods for ages. Do you think that's not had any impact at all? Let's be a little bit of honesty in this debate. So, I want to talk briefly about the three items. First of all, the aspirations programme. Firstly, the aspirations programme, excellent stuff, but we must make sure it is for the people who live there. It would be all too easy, and a suspicion we might have about you in our worst moments, given the amount of affordable housing you've had in this borough, to build the people who live there out. It will be all too easy. We've got to make sure this is for the people who live there now or their natural successors. On the family recovery project, again, excellent, but we're not going to stop people falling into poverty if we don't attack the fundamental structural issues, which your party is not interested in doing. So and then the housing allocation scheme, I have to confess, I have a small problem with that. I'm prepared to go along with it and see how it goes. I've always been doubtful about replacing need as the number one criterion. Here we're kind of changing it a bit and making it residency. That's, I find, very odd. If you live in some roads in the borough, on one side you're in Lambeth, the other side you're in Wandsworth, why you're excluded in quite that way. Most of the people don't know which borough they're in half the time, and for people at the poorest end of the economy, Councillor Grimston, unlike you, they are peripatetic because they have to be, because they're forced from place to place, and we're really making it very difficult for them. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I support all items of this, but don't forget the fundamentals, the problems behind.
And lastly, Councillor Govindia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thought it was an extremely good debate. Although, listening to Councillor Belton, I thought he was the kind of person who says, where there is unity, let me bring rancour. I'd say also that Councillor Hogg probably made one of the nicest and most interesting contributions. Can I concentrate on two things? One is about the regeneration that we are proposing in both Latchmere and Roehampton wards. We talked about it as not only just a hard regeneration, but also some of the more walls in the mind kind of regeneration ideas. The health programme that is unveiled for Roehampton, putting £500,000 of various interventions based on, well, the idea is that at the end of it, the health outcomes will improve, but not only will improve, but they will become sustainable and remain enduring for the community in Roehampton. Similarly, changing the shopping offer and changing the retail offer in Roehampton will add to not only jobs, but also ability for people to shop locally and be part of the community. Right, on the hard changes, we will have a master plan coming up fairly soon. Well, the master planners will be announced probably next week, and we will start the process of engagement and building on it. And I hope that at the end of that process we will get a plan that is widely embraced, not only by us in the Town Hall, but also the people outside. I sort of say that also Councillor Sutters and Gibbons and Caddy talked about sort of family recovery program and aspects of that. And of course what we are doing is we are talking about tough love, supportive love, rather than nanny state. We are talking about helping the most vulnerable families, the most needy families. And yes, of course there will be people at the margins. It's like drawing a line. There will be somebody close to the line but on the other side of the line. And of course we need to make sure that once we have tackled this job, then there may be others who might need our help. But it has got to be kind of intervention in which our other non-local authority partners, the local community, the neighbours, the friends, the churches, need to help to make sure that the change that these families have made in their lives is enduring, so that they are there as a kind of support mechanism, the welfare mechanism that we all ourselves have within our communities, our homes and our friends. Now, say one very simple thing, because I do think it's an important thing, and I know that one of the bugbears we have had is that how far have we engaged or not engaged with the communities whose areas that we are talking about regenerating. I believe we have engaged very much. We have talked before the start of the main regeneration program. We've had meetings where we've explained things. We have involved people in all stages, and we intend to continue to involve people in all stages. But in my view, this initiative is far, far too important for somebody to become somebody's part of their community development experiment. If people want to play games with what we are setting out, I have to say to them the resources are scarce and needs are very many. There will be other parts of the borough which would embrace this kind of intervention, this kind of investment, rather more than some who want to simply find holes in it. So it may be that it is a message that both sides need to take on board and spread it for those who think that this is a place where they can start experimenting with their ideas of community development. Just the final point, Mr. Mayor, it's about Councillor Belton's sort of fear, perhaps, that regeneration might mean that it leaves the existing communities behind. There is no intention of doing that. In fact, our track record in regeneration that we've embarked on and completed successfully in other estate regeneration programs has shown that people who stay have stayed. People who have come in have appreciated what the council has done. We have tried to keep and build stable community, and indeed that's exactly what we want to do. New stock that it gets added to both areas will, using the new allocation system, perhaps help people stay closer to their extended family and perhaps build in the resilience that they need. Mr. Mayor, I think this is a motion on which both sides can agree. I think there is an enormous amount of partnership between the two sides, and I hope that there is also an enormous amount of partnership in actually making sure that it is the tenants and the residents of these areas who drive the thinking and drive the involvement, and not outsiders who muscle in thinking this is their time to show what they can do.
Following on from the last few words from the leader, I'm going to ask the Council for its indulgence. Is this motion supported unanimously?